Boom, boom. What's going on, everyone? We are back with another wedding business growth for you tonight. We've got an exciting show lined up for everyone. Hello, hello. What is going on? Big Earn. Glad to see you, brother. Hope you're doing well.
Big Earn, quick on the comments. That's what
Yes,
we were
sir.
talking
I
about.
love it. Appreciate you, brother. Frank, what's going on, man? How you been?
Man, I'm doing pretty well. Had my second wedding of in the last 7 months. This past weekend, it went really well. Got to bring out my new photo booth, which was awesome. Actually,
Oh,
had a
yeah.
long conversation with Earn about it the next day. Yeah, man. No, I mean it was a lot of fun, and it was good to be back out there and ramping up
Yes.
the actual wedding game, which is something that hasn't happened in Virginia
Yeah,
that much.
I'm glad to see everyone's getting back to work for sure, and slowly but surely, man, we're getting there. But we got a great episode lined up for everyone tonight. Amazing guests lined up. I'm gonna skip the day. David's not here with us tonight, as you can see. But we're gonna hold the show down. We're gonna jump right into it. We'll let her kind of introduce herself. We're gonna be talking about social media tonight. Some really great topics of discussion, things that I'm very, very interested about. Yeah, that I think will be very pertinent to a lot of people out here. So let's bring her in. Serena, what is going on? Thanks for being
Hi,
with us tonight.
everyone. Yeah,
Hey,
thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk a lot about social media tonight and social media strategy. But maybe just for our listeners, just a little bit of background about yourself, about
Yeah.
your journey in social media.
Yeah, so it's really funny. I started in the wedding industry in 2004. So obviously before social media was a thing, when we were still doing bridal shows and print magazine ads, and it was a little bit more on the old school, but we were right on the cusp. So I was in the wedding space for several years, and then I jumped into corporate America for a bit, but stayed kind of connected to the wedding space, and then came back into it through a wedding publication. And it was when I was at the wedding publication that I would be selling ads to people, and then I'd get to their website or I'd get to their social media, and it was just hot mess express all over the place. Nobody was keeping up with their blogs. Their content was super old. They weren't writing anything. They weren't using hashtags. There were just all these things that I was seeing that were missing, and Instagram was just starting to get traction in the wedding space. And I thought, I think I can help people. I really do think I can just help them get it together when it comes to their social. This was even before there were Instagram schedulers out there. But having been in the wedding space myself and having an understanding for how difficult the entire process can be post-wedding, just to keep up with getting the images and getting that stuff posted. I mean, once you're done with the wedding, you're ready to move on to the next one. And the thought of going back and having to do all that extra work just to get your portfolio updated and all that, I could see that it was a major pain point for people. So that's essentially what started the business. And I reached out to some of my old contacts and I said, is this something that you'd be into? Because I had people tell me nobody will ever pay you for that. Like, that's not a career. And I'm like, I think it might be. So I reached out to somebody who was local to my market here in St. Augustine, Jacksonville. And she was like, yes, please sign me up right now. And I didn't even my LLC wasn't even sealed yet, So I was like, all right, so let's figure this out. And over the last 6 years now, it's just evolved and changed so much. And it's very difficult now to see a wedding pro really kind of get that traction that they need now without social media. I mean, there are still some people who are doing it, but it's few and far between now.
It's really difficult to kind of operate a business without social media, honestly. Yeah. There's such a presence, and it is honestly how we've been gifted this technology to be able to connect with each other. And I mean, this is how we're doing it. So pretty much kind of get on the train or be left behind. So let's kind of get into some of the topics here. Something that I've struggled with a lot is the anxiety of being on social media. I'm not sure necessarily why, but we always get a little bit of, hesitation or like this post, or, maybe it's almost an over stimulation of being on this, on the platforms. I'm not sure what it is. I definitely have a lot of social media anxiety for sure. Maybe we could talk about social media anxiety management, or how we can identifying it, maybe what it is, and then how we can kind of work to get over those hurdles.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that happens with a lot of people in social is this sense of imposter syndrome. That's one of the
Mm,
first things that contributes to that overall feeling of anxiety when it comes to social. And I find the first thing I tell people to do is please stop following your competition. Like, I understand we're
okay.
vendor friends here, we're teammates,
Yeah.
it's all a team effort, and we all have to work well together. But you also have to utilize social media as a business platform. And if you wouldn't have your competitors all up in your business in the back end, you're not required by any means to follow them or have them part of your social media strategy. So that's one of the first things that I think a lot of people don't realize that they have permission to do, is to just not follow people that bring them feelings of anxiety. Like,
Mm,
the unfollow button is a beautiful thing. And if you don't want to unfollow them, the mute button is a beautiful thing, because that exists now. You can mute their stories. You can not engage with their content. They won't show up in your feed. And just making a conscientious effort to not engage with those people that bring you those feelings of imposter syndrome or feelings of, I'm not doing enough, I'm not showing up enough, that helps to lessen it. But I think also just picking your platform and saying, I know I'm good at this on this platform, so that's where I'm going to spend my attention, and not feeling like you have to be everywhere. With Instagram now, there's reels, there's stories,
yeah.
there's IGTVs, there's lives, there's the grid, there's this, like, am I supposed to do the highlights? There's all
Right.
of these different things. And as soon as you log on and you see all those buttons, it's very normal to say, what am I doing today? Like, how am I
Right.
supposed to approach this? Where do I show up? And if you've identified, hey, I'm actually a pretty good writer, I feel pretty comfortable like writing about what's going on, then just decide to show up on the grid and write your story. If you don't feel comfortable with how you write and you don't feel like you have good imagery, then show up on stories and talk about what the event that you just did, or talk about, how you're doing your pre-planning for the weddings, and just really kind of deciding, this is what I know that I feel comfortable with, and then letting somebody else worry about the rest, or just deciding I don't need to do the rest. I think there's this mentality with social now that we say, well, everybody else is doing it, I have to show up, I have to do all of these things, and I have to explain myself. I haven't shown up for months, I have to explain to everybody why I've been absent. Like, when they
Yeah.
first post for the first time after like 3 months, to be like, hey everybody, I'm back. Well, guess what? No one was really paying attention. Like, it sounds harsh, but most people, like, we're
So
so
true.
busy and we're
Yeah.
consuming so much. We didn't know it was 3 months. We thought it was 3 days. Like, we have no
Yeah.
concept of time this last year. So not feeling like, you have to apologize if you haven't been present. Just decide to commit to some kind of consistency and show up. And if you can promise yourself to show up twice a week, that's going to minimize this feeling like that you have to do all of this other stuff in between. Just picking your schedule and sticking with it is number one in managing that feeling of overwhelm.
That's huge. Yeah, Frank, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so social media, like the anxiety of social media for me initially was trying to understand what makes each piece of, like, Instagram, for example, different, right? How is the grid different from the story, different from the reel? Where's the best use of each of those things? And it's overwhelming because you just don't know what direction to go. Okay, well, I have this really nice picture. Do I throw it on a story, or do I throw it on my grid? Do I make a video and put it on my story, or do I put it on my reels? Like, all those different things are kind of difficult to navigate. And I think that's what heightened my anxiety of social media, is just an understanding of each one and how to use it. What do
Mhm.
you say to somebody who just doesn't understand, like, each of those lanes of, like, an Instagram, and how do you help them identify what lane that they need to be hitting and when?
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite analogies, especially because I can do this with the wedding spaces. We could talk about wedding cake. So let's say you have a client that loves a big, elaborate, super fancy wedding cake, and they want the big display, they want the backdrop, they want like the fondant, they want all the embellishments, they want the fresh flowers, they want a super delicious cake inside. Like, if that is your client, you have to show up everywhere on Instagram. But if your client loves just a nice old hunk of cake with just a little bit of frosting, like you can pull back and just say, I'm going to post on the grid. So the way I look at it is your grid post is like your cake. It's just whatever flavor of cake that you want to be. And it's the foundational element of what a wedding cake really is. And then when you look at the frosting, you're talking about your stories. Like that's the thing that kind of like wraps this cake up and makes it really nice and delicious. But then if you want to start putting those embellishments on there, then you need to start showing up on your reels. And then you maybe need to show up on your IGTVs. And then if you are really wanting to give them this big, beautiful cake table, wonderful display, the entire experience, then you have to say, all right, so I need an IGTV strategy. I need my story strategy. I need my reel strategy. I need my grid strategy. They all have to play together, and I have to show up on all of them in different ways with a different little piece of content for each. So that's the way, I explain it, because again, not every client needs the full display. Some of them just want a nice, classic, simple cake with just a little bit of personality. And if that's the case, you can very easily say, I'm going to post my really pretty stuff on the grid, and then I'm going to show up on stories with some behind the scenes so they can get to know me. End of story. Don't worry about anything else. Because all of these other things that exist, your client might not actually be consuming them for their wedding. They might be consuming them because they're interested in this particular influencer's fashion sense, or they might be following this particular company because they're really interested in how they make this particular piece of something like piece of clothing, or how they make that recipe. But that doesn't mean that as a wedding, like somebody who's planning a wedding, that they're interested in all those other pieces of content, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And I think, like I said, I think that's one of the big things. There's just so many different lanes. And then it's the same thing now. It's growing on Facebook. And then you have a million different social media platforms that pop up all the time and that you can utilize in different ways to elevate your business. I think that was one of those anxiety pieces for me. The other anxiety piece that I know that I had was feeling the need to interact with everyone who interacted with me. So if they post a comment on a picture on Instagram, I feel like not only do I have to heart it, but I also have to like say something back. And then I feel like I need to spend some time and hit their grid and do the same thing for them. So how do you help people like navigate that anxiety of feeling like they have to respond to everybody? And if so, do you think it's actually good to do that and respond to everybody as well?
Yeah, so responses are super important just because it is social media and you should be using it as a social platform, but that doesn't mean that you have to show up every single day to do that. It is absolutely okay in your business to say, my social days to show up and interact with people are Tuesdays and Thursdays. That's when it's feasible for me. I can jump on for 10 minutes. I can check all that stuff and I can respond. What's even better is if you are using something like a Planoly or a Later or a scheduler, you can actually respond to those comments from your desktop through that particular scheduler so that you don't actually have to get onto the platform and get distracted. That can really make it a business to do. Like, okay, here's my to-do, my 5 minutes, let me get this done and move on. Because what happens is we do find ourselves getting onto a platform to interact and engage and say hi, and then an hour has gone by and you actually only spent 5 minutes doing the thing that you were supposed to be doing. So we all suffer with that. So I find if you like put those limits, whether it's a timer or, utilize one of the other options to be able to respond to people, it helps. But I also think that something that a lot of people just forget is that they spend so much time interacting with other vendors on their profile that they forget that sometimes the vendors aren't the ones that are paying their bills. So again, like you are not required to respond to everything unless it is a couple that has, left you a message. Then of course you want to respond to them. And I think, when you start looking at it as, okay, from a business perspective, my first priority is always my client. My second priority is the team of people that are helping me. Whatever your priority in your business is, deciding that's how you're going to show up on social media for those people is where it starts to feel a little bit less overwhelming. If you're keeping that kind of like eye on the prize, like this is my strategy. My strategy is to build relationships with my clients on social, and keeping that in mind, it makes it less worrisome if you maybe forgot to to heart that, or you forgot to share that, or, whatever it may be. But again, if you pick that one day and say, I'm just going to do vendor stuff today, and then I'm going to do couple stuff this day, it helps, again, not feel like you have to be there for everybody all the time.
Well, that's a really great point about the, I really need to get on later, because that's fantastic that you can pretty much interact with people without falling into like, oh, like you said, like I'm scrolling on Instagram and Facebook for an hour, and we've all been there and done it for sure. So no, having that is really awesome. And then another point that I would just add to that as well is like using, like you kind of alluded to it earlier, but using social media to be social, like it's almost like connections with people that you would connect with otherwise, or, and of course couples and stuff for the business. But it's like I think a lot of the times I get very disconnected from it myself, where I'm just like, oh, I'm just mindlessly like responding to a comment. It's like, dude, these are real connections with real people. And like, I feel like I always have to remind myself, like, there's someone else on the other end of that. It's not like a real human being. So yeah, just something else I would add to that for sure. But, maybe we can kind of talk a little bit about like social media strategy and how we create. What does a strategy really look like?
Yeah. So I tell anybody when it starts, when it comes to Instagram, I'm going to pull up my little list because I don't want to forget.
Yeah.
So I tell everybody, choose 2 to 3 goals for Instagram, and I'm going to go through the list for you. So it's showcase your products or services, build your community, increase awareness for your brand, showcase your company cultures and values, advertise to potential customers, increase your brand loyalty, share company news and updates, inspire your followers with ideas, or educate, whether it's about products, services, processes, or anything else that you feel could use some education. Now, sure, all of those are fantastic ideas for Instagram. Like we could do all that every single day, but picking the top 2 to 3 is going to help you to get crystal clear on what the content around each of those items are. So when it comes to strategy, it's kind of how are you using it? Why are you using it? Who is the ideal client that you're trying to reach? Or for some people, it's not about a client. It's just about building awareness within their community and their other vendors and keeping those relationships going. If that's part of your strategy, then the type of content you're sharing is obviously going to be very different. Let's say you're a photographer and you know that you have all these business resources that you eventually want to sell to other photographers. You want to give them training, you want to give them courses. Then the type of content that you're putting on your Instagram, you have to decide, like, am I talking to these people I want to sell to eventually, or am I talking to my current clients that are my brides and grooms right now? Because I think, where it gets super murky for people is they feel like they're talking to everybody, but you just need to talk to one person. You talk to your one person that you are trying to sell, who's going to pay you. And when you're keeping that in mind, it helps you with figuring out your tone, it helps you with your topics, and it helps you with the content. And then my advice to people is to pick 5 to 7, what I call the content pillars. And I don't think that's probably a new phrase to anybody, but your content pillars are, those 5 to 7 pieces of content that that you can share, and you can create additional pieces of content around, whether it's the video content or the grid content or the reels content. It can be any of those things, but whether it's sharing, again, educational content, sharing testimonials, sharing venue spotlights or vendor spotlights, sharing personal stories of things that maybe went wrong. Like, gosh, I wish more people would talk about the stuff that goes wrong on the wedding day and how you fix it. Because we don't talk about that, and that helps build value, like how can you add value and build that trust and confidence with your potential clients? So picking those particular pillars is super important to creating those additional pieces of content. And I think another thing a lot of people forget to do is they forget that their blog could essentially, if they would blog and create really juicy, great pieces of content through their blog, they would never have to write a piece of social content again, because they could write a great blog that they could then take 5 to 6 quotes out of, and then you'd have a week's worth of content for your social media.
Ooh.
And then you could repurpose all of that into a reel, or you could repurpose it into an IGTV or a YouTube. There are all kinds of things that you could repurpose. So if you take the time to write the really juicy content once, it saves you a ton of time down the road.
And you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone, because that stuff on your website can also be used for SEO and stuff like that. Yeah. So that might be the greatest takeaway of the show. I can speak to that 100%. And one thing that I found, as a videographer in the industry, It's really easy for me, honestly, because you have your, like you said, the pillar content where it's the wedding video that goes up on Vimeo or YouTube, and then from there you're just breaking that down to Facebook, Instagram, and wherever else, like you said, like where are your people at? So no, that's so. Maybe the question that I'm left with is, how do you get really clear on the strategy? Like how do I find what's best? How do I find what's best for me? Like I know, like we kind of talked about like your steps and stuff like that, but how do you focus in on like those 2 or 3 things that are like, this is what I need to get, like, if you don't know, like if you're coming from a place where you're just like, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah. So one of the first places I start with anyone is I say, well, what are the questions that you're getting asked during your inquiries, or what are the things that are coming up again and again during the process between booking to actually the wedding day? What's something that's coming up for you again and again on the wedding day? What's something that's maybe coming up for you after the wedding day? And just kind of picking out some of those nuggets, that tells you right there, like, okay, well, one thing that's coming up again and again is they don't understand why they can't book me for 4 hours, and they feel like that should be enough time to do everything for the day. Okay, so there's a piece of content, and there's something you need to talk about a lot. You need to talk about the wedding day timeline. You need to talk about what's involved before, after, during. You can break that out into pieces of content. You need to talk about why, 4 hours would only get you XYZ, and really kind of talking about those things that are coming up for you again and again, because it's great pillar, like what I call the cornerstone content, or, like rotating evergreen content, because you are going to get those questions often. And if you have that kind of content established and created, you can then send that to somebody as they ask those questions. You can create a series on your stories and then put that in your highlights. So when someone asks you about that, you can say, oh, you might want to watch this highlight on my Instagram, or you might want to watch this video that I put up on Vimeo or that I put up on YouTube answering these questions. Or you could just keep it as a back internal video that you've created that you're sharing with somebody, or a blog post that you're sharing with somebody. So that's one of the first places. Let's talk about those things. And then let's talk about where you want your business to go. Are you happy with the clients you're working with right now? Are you happy with, what the process looks like from booking? Are you getting a lot of price objections? Are you feeling like you need to charge more for your service? Identifying those things. And once you kind of know that, you can say, okay, I need to up level in this area because I'm clearly not reaching the people that I want. Or yeah, I'm reaching the people I want. So now it's time to survey my audience and reach back out to your past couples and say, hey, how did you find me? What was it about working with me that you loved? Can you give me a testimonial? Can you start to use some of the words that they've used and repurpose it in clever ways to create your own content pieces and to help you create that strategy? So it's a lot of just asking questions during your sales process, and asking questions to current and past couples, and really also asking questions from fellow vendors, because sometimes you are so crystal clear on your process and what you provide and your value. You can't imagine that anybody would question that. Of course you bring value. Of course you're like, what you're doing, but then you realize that everybody else out there is completely discrediting you or selling you wrong way, and creating really good, content pieces around those kinds of issues are going to help everybody. It's going to help the industry as a whole. I think, you get a lot of people who maybe don't understand why stationery costs as much as it does, because a DJ or videographer is most likely never going to touch, anything to do with the stationery. So they can't make that recommendation or help somebody with those content pieces, but they can start to forge those relationships and talk about like the team effort of a wedding and, like how every piece contributes to the day. So I think there are a lot of content pillars that could work the exact same for every single wedding pro. It would just be how to spin it to make it applicable to what you do and how you're providing your service. Does that help?
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot to unpack for sure.
Yeah.
So let me ask then, when you're picking out those 2 or 3 things, right, that you're gonna focus your strategy in on, if you start to get those 2 or 3 things like down pat, right? Like
Yes.
you got them, it's coming to you easy. You got a lot of content built out for a while. You know how to easily repackage to streamline that process. Like you've got those down. Is that a time where should that wedding pro, should that business owner either then expand from those 2 or 3 things to maybe 4 or 5 things? Or is that a sign that maybe you want to pivot one of those things to something else? Like, should you never go past those 2 or 3 items, or does there come a time where you can start to identify other things that you want to also offer through social media?
Yeah. So I tell everybody, give it 3 months, whatever you're doing, whatever strategy you're trying, give it 3 months and see if it's getting legs. And at that point, decide if you're going to swap it out or if you're going to add to it. Because I think a lot of times we're like, oh, well, I made that post. All right, I'm good. And then they never make the post about that same thing ever again because they made the one post. And what happens is only, if you have 100 followers, you are lucky if 20 of them saw that. If you have 1,000 followers, you're lucky if 2 of them saw it. So I think, a lot of times people think that if they post it once or twice, that's enough. So you have to get consistent with whatever your strategy is for that 3-month period. And then you can start adding to it. And again, like once you start to feel like it's comfortable and you have that kind of content, then you can decide to increase your posting, or you can add in those other pillars or objectives and goals. And if things start working, like definitely ride that wave, but don't ever get so like stuck in that wave that you don't see the next one coming. It's definitely one of those things you always want to be thinking how you can level up, or what's the next thing that you can do, or, should you be incorporating more of this, that, or the other, whatever that may be. Are you going to jump on the Clubhouse train, or are you going to maybe jump on the TikTok train, or, do you want to use each of those platforms a little bit differently? But definitely switching it up is always encouraged, but don't switch it up too soon.
Gotcha. What's this Clubhouse thing you mentioned? No, I'm just joking.
TikTok. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm on Clubhouse way too much still. So let's kind of change the direction here a little bit. What is that 1 or 2 things that you see out of wedding pros within their social media strategy that you're like, oh no, that is not the right move for this or for that? Whether it's just a misunderstanding of the use of like a reel, or is it something bigger and larger that you see regularly when you first like meet with your clients to get into like what you're going to do with them?
Oh gosh, that's such a great question. I would say one of them, and it's probably, this is more just an etiquette thing, but there's still advice floating around that you should be tagging everybody and their mother on a post. So when you have a post, tag all the vendors, yes, but don't go tag 17 publications. Don't go tag all of these other people that had nothing to do with that wedding just because you want to hack the algorithm and get more people to see it. It's just so not okay. There are so many notifications that are dinging us all the time. Let's make sure at least the notifications are valid and worth being seen. Like I did some work with a wedding publication and they got tagged all the time in things that had nothing to do with them. They weren't even advertisers. There was nothing that had anything to do with anything. And they were just constantly tagging them. And there is advice out there. So I see certain people within the industry, like certain providers that are more guilty of this than others, but that's just an etiquette no-no that I want people to be aware of, that's not okay. The next one would probably be just not using hashtags. So I think a lot of people, there's so much overwhelm with what hashtag is the right hashtag, or do I use all 30, or do I use 3, or do, I use that, what do I do? Using hashtags is going to increase your visibility and your impressions and your overall reach by at least 12% and sometimes up to 20%. So just not putting anything there can sometimes be detrimental. Now, there is something to be said for skipping them every now and then just to see how your current audience is engaging with your content versus strangers. And by checking your insights regularly, you can get a feel for that. I have some clients that I might just not put them on every like 6 or 7 posts. I will skip the hashtags just because I want to see if anybody is engaging that from their, existing followers. And that's a good practice to do, but definitely don't skip them, all the time, because you'll lose out on the opportunity to be seen. And that includes your stories. You can hashtag your stories. And that's probably one of the number one things that people don't do is they don't hashtag their stories. And that loses some reach and engagement from strangers that you could be finding. And that's the same with Reels, making sure that you have your hashtags there. And then on the same vein of hashtags is using ones that have nothing to do with anything. Again, don't put love, hashtag love. Like that is the most popular hashtag in the world. You're never going to get anybody finding you from that hashtag. But love in Cleveland, maybe you might get more because you're in Cleveland and, people are more likely to look for that. So just making sure that you're using relevant hashtags and actually using them is probably one of the number one mistakes that I see.
That's a great, I just to interject real quick. I have like personal experience with that. I've had couples and I've had clients find me based on Instagram hashtags. And I asked them, I was like, how did you find me? And they were like, oh, on social media. I was like, oh, where? Instagram. And they're like, yeah, I just searched hashtags for St. Augustine videographer and you came up. I was like, what? Like, it's crazy. There is such a tool there, but as you said, like it has to be used like poignantly and like properly for sure. So that's all I wanted to say there.
Yeah.
I mean, I did one reel. My very first reel I'd ever done was just like this little, like, I'm in my new house. I videotaped myself with my little podcast setup that is not what I want it to be right now. And all I did was hashtag podcast life. And I got double the views of what my followers are just for that one hashtag. But then I've had posts in the past where I felt like back before when I would just like hashtag everything that I could think of and try to go with the biggest ones that I could think of that didn't amount to anywhere near that kind of a reach. So it's really interesting that you bring up the hashtags. Do you suggest putting hashtags in the caption of the post, or are you more on the side of putting hashtags comment, like in the first comment?
Yeah, so I will tell you it doesn't technically matter, but my rule of thumb is to put it in the caption, and I'll tell you why. If Instagram changes their mind tomorrow and says, we're not going to search captions or we're not going to search in the comments anymore, then what? You've lost that opportunity. So we don't know what Instagram's going to do tomorrow. So I tend to follow a little bit more on the path of, well, how was it originally intended before people decided they wanted to game the system? And that's the rule of thumb that I try and follow.
That's a good point. And I guess I should move my captions or my hashtags into the caption.
Well, you can totally do it, but it's one of those things that you just never know.
You never know. Yeah.
You just never know.
Yeah.
But right now it doesn't really matter.
Okay. Well, it's good to know. I had a point. I completely forgot what I was going to say.
Not enough Dr. Pepper.
I know. I totally agree with the poignant thing. I noticed that like I think the worst advice you can give to someone is to your point was to use in the beginning when you know nothing about hashtags, you just put like the hash. You're like, oh, I should just use the hashtag with the most, it's 4 billion posts. Like, yeah, that'll be the one. And I feel like if you're trying to sell a specific product or a service, like you need to have a broader reach than that. And I just don't feel like you can get that on a post that's getting lost in. You're getting like you said, hashtag love has 4 billion posts, and you're just getting lost in there. Versus St. Augustine videographer or whatever, that hangs at you. My post will hang out in the top there for a lot longer for sure.
Yeah,
and you're reaching actual clients. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, that's one of those things that we get so caught up on the vanity metric of the likes and the follows that we feel like more compelled to do that. So that's why we do it. And we forget that our strategy was to use it to reach potential clients, and our potential clients don't want to sift through that. They're looking for something very, very specific.
Or just running ads, but having absolutely no like direction for the ad, and you're just using it to run up the numbers. Like honestly, like been guilty of that myself. Like I'm just like, all right, I'll send this out and see what happens. It's like, dude, that's just a vanity metric. Like you said, like there's no, like you're not even targeting like St. Augustine or Virginia or New York, wherever you're at. It's like you're just like, all right, like just caution of the wind. It's almost the equivalent of like just posting the hashtag love thing and just like kind of hoping it goes well. Yeah. Frank, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, actually, I'm just going to roll off of that. So one thing that I have never done is put any money, and I don't have that kind of following. So it's not like I'm saying this out of like, I have a huge following and I've never put any money into ads. I'm more asking because I don't. I'm more asking from the perspective, is that like, when is the appropriate time, or what is the appropriate piece of content for somebody who's listening right now to know when it's the right time to put some kind of money into a post to kind of promote it more? Like when does that work?
Yeah. So if you have a date you're trying to book, a very specific date, and you've made a post about that, you can definitely boost or make an ad around specific dates or promotions that you have. I think the mistake that happens a lot with ads is that we do these ads because we want more inquiries, but we don't necessarily have a funnel to put them through. We haven't established an email provider, so we're not collecting email addresses. We're just landing them on the website, and they get on the website and they don't know what they're supposed to do. So then they click around and then they leave, and they forgot to fill out the contact form because they're not sure why they're there in the first place. So, if you're going to do ads, you have to have a super clear funnel strategy. You have to say, like, I'm doing the ads because I need the traffic to the site. And when I get the traffic to the site, I need them to do X, Y, Z. And you have to really give them that very clear direction from point A to Z. So I think that's one of the things that before you ever put any money into ads, you just need to know what you're trying to get out of it. And then making sure that you have all the back end processes set to do that. So I find that when it's most effective is to just put them on a very specific landing page that's not even your website, to get them to fill out something or download something. And then after that, you can direct them back to your website to look around. For wedding pros, I think a lot of them could be making opt-ins that they're not doing right now that would be so valuable to couples, and it would allow them to also leverage Pinterest and Google if they had really good opt-ins. So for DJs, it could be my top 100 list of songs that you want to incorporate in their wedding. Or you could even break them down by here's cake cutting, here's entrance, here's, like bridal party, here's first dance songs for father-daughter, mother-son, like, and really break those down into a series, or like download it and then create like a whole email series around that, or a whole like Instagram series around it where you're repurposing that content. If, you're a baker, you might want to give them a download of like the difference between a buttercream and a fondant and the different flavor combinations that might be available, or the different styles that they didn't even know existed when it came to sugar art. So there are all of these really beautiful pieces of content you can create. And when you do an ad, you can filter them to that. And then you at least have their email address, and you can decide from there, am I going to reach out? Am I going to pursue this? Or am I going to retarget them at a later date?
Gotcha. So when you talked about like landing them somewhere outside of your website to with that one-off download, provide your email kind of thing, are there certain like landing page services that you prefer, or is it just, are they all kind of like one in a million at that point, just whichever one pops up on top at Google?
Yeah, so it depends on how like robust your content is. So for example, for anyone who's watching, you can go to my website and you can go delegateandelevate.com and you can go /freebie. And that is where I have 3 very specific things that anybody can download at any point in time. And those are my opt-in options, but they can choose to either go straight to a proposal form so they can see some options that are available for them to purchase right now. They can download a book about, social media time savers, or they can get free stock images from me. So that lives on my website, but it can also, I have it connected to my MailChimp. So it follows into my MailChimp. Some people use a ConvertKit. I have that for my other business, and that's great. You can create that in the email provider, and that's the same as a MailChimp or a Flowdesk. You can create a landing page just in your email provider and direct them that way. Or if you're using something even more robust, you can build a sales page in something like a Kajabi or, a Thinkific or something like that if you're housing additional content that you want them to consume. But it's really about picking the one that feels the least overwhelming to you, because it does take a certain level of tech savvy to set it up. And it might be worth just making that hire for a VA to set it up for you, or asking an assistant or somebody on your team if they feel comfortable attacking that. Because like today, I spent like an hour creating like Canvas stuff for somebody. And I'm like, my assistant could have done that. But we get like, we get this idea and we're like, oh, I want to do that. So then we tackle it instead of actually having somebody else in our business tackle it to help us move it forward. Like, and we come up with the big idea, let somebody else like actually do the minutia of the business. But yeah, even comparing those platforms, that's a great task for Fiverr. Like, please just put me, like, I would normally never say go to Fiverr, but go to Fiverr and get a breakdown of a spreadsheet of all of the different email providers, how much they cost, what the freebies are, and then make a decision from there.
That is great advice, and I love how you kind of segued us into our last topic of discussion here with you, and it goes right along with your business name. So I love this, or I'm assuming that's your business name, right? Delegate and Elevate. Yeah. So how, when you're talking about social media, how do you effectively delegate and elevate your brand? I mean, that's a challenge, right? As creatives, which the whole wedding industry is full of them. Yep. You really take this ownership in your messaging and your branding, and you feel, you have this fear that you're the only one that can deliver this, and you don't think that anybody else can do that, because it's all, people have this, they misunderstand that there's a difference between people connecting with you and wanting to hear your voice, but then the ability to duplicate that voice is something that's out there, and it's feasible, and it can be done. So chat a little bit with us about how you can effectively delegate and elevate.
Yeah. So we are all extremely attached to our businesses. We are much more emotional about things than we need to be. That's, I think, just part of entrepreneurship in the wedding space. I don't know if it's like that for everybody else, but that's just the reality of things. So one of the first things people can do is create kind of what I call the SOPs, the, standard operating procedures, but I spin it a little and I say your standard social procedures, so your SSPs, and really getting a feel for what your preferences are for social. And this is why I encourage everybody to kind of mess around on their own with social for a little bit before they make a hire, because they kind of need to know where their weaknesses are and what they do feel good with. I have some clients who love engagement. They're like, I will log on to Instagram every day and engage, but I don't ever want to physically make a post myself. In that case, like, we have been able to establish all engagement is done by you versus all caption writing is done by me, and so select your images. And we've kind of figured out what works. But, we have to, one, identify where our time suck is when it comes to social, two, what we do like about it. And then three, we need to start outlining what is important to us in our brand voice. And I think for a lot of people, the reason they feel like somebody can't come into their business and pick up is because they've either, one, not established their systems, or two, they actually aren't super clear on their brand themselves. They haven't done that heart work or head work, depending on, what their personality type is, to really kind of establish who they're trying to talk to, how they're trying to speak to them, how they want their brand to be portrayed. They haven't figured out that, it's important to me to be a thought leader versus, just somebody who's like, a cog. So I think that that's one of the first things that people have to do, is really just make sure that they've identified that. And then that part of control. Like, you expect your couples to trust you because you know what you're doing. Like, this is no different when you hire a social media person or a virtual assistant or anything else. Like, you are hiring them for their expertise. So you have to be willing to let them use their expertise and just keep in communication with it. Because I think that's one of the hardest things when making hires and delegating out, is that you either over communicate or you under communicate. And that's where things start to feel really scary. Like, once you've paid that invoice, you get scared because you're like, nothing's happening. Like, I'm not getting clients right now. Well, it doesn't work that way. You've really got to set those expectations and clearly say, I'm outsourcing this because this is what I want out of it. So those conversations have to happen before you make that. Building a team is it can be super hard because it is, so personal. I have a team now of 6, and I have struggled to get there because I had the same problem. I didn't want to delegate it out because I'm like, listen, the people hire me because I'm the one with the wedding experience. So I know what they're going through. So of course nobody can write it like I do, or they can't pictures like I do, or they can't do this. And then I realized, okay, well, it's my inability to hire for the things that I need that's holding me back. So once I realized, okay, well, if I hire other people who have experience doing what I do, that's going to help lessen the learning curve, and it's going to be easier for them to jump in and just figure it out. And if I've given them some clear systems and guidelines, and I've video trained, that's a huge one. Loom is like my best friend. I video everything that I do, at least desktop wise that I can. I will video everything and create tutorials for everything. So anybody who comes into my team can just hop in. They can see the systems that I've outlined. They can watch the tutorial videos and they can just pick it up. And that even comes to, like, if you're hiring out, audio messages are amazing because they can pick up your dictation. They can pick up your accent. They can pick up those words that you use that you don't know that you use, or the phrases that often come to you again and again and again. So again, that goes with the communication. It's just making sure that you're letting people get a sense of who you are so that they can help you. You can't hold back when you hire a team member, or whether it's a VA or, an actual assistant. Like, you cannot hold back. They have to know who you are in order to be able to serve you. So I think that's one of the big mistakes that happens a lot when we make those hires, is we just feel like we don't tell them everything, and then they can't get into our brains and make it happen for us. So I don't know if that was helpful or not, but that's a little bit of my experience with it.
Extremely helpful. And I love how you said you have to do the heart work and head work before you can figure out those kinds of things. Like, what are you going to be good at? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And then kind of capitalize from there, for sure. No, I love that. Definitely something that I need to apply to my own business, for sure. No, that was great. Well, we know that you have some other stuff going on. Folks, if you have any other questions and you want to, feel free to drop them right now. We're getting ready to kind of wrap this up. Serena, thanks for your time. We really appreciate you being on the show. Frank, is there anything else that you wanted to add here while everyone's getting those last comments in?
Yeah, well, I just want to echo, I really appreciate, because I think I've been hearing it more consistently, especially jumping on Clubhouse way too much, right? It is people talking about that you just have to tell somebody what you want, right? And then you have to be a good judge of whether they can do it or not. And that might be a little trial and error. And maybe you hire 5 people and 2 of them can't and 3 of them can. And, that's just kind of part of the process. I'm having a hard time right now in my own business because I have a group of guys that work for me, but I've known them forever. Like, I trust them with my kids, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I knew them way before my business. Well, they're all getting to the point where I think they're for different reasons going to be phasing themselves out a little bit. And so now I'm like, okay, well, I don't have anybody else that I trust with my kids that I also trust with my business like that. So now I have to build up that trust for people just for my business. And it's scary because, these are guys that I've known my whole life. And now I'm going to be looking at people that I maybe have never met in my life to potentially help out with the business.
It is. It's so scary. And I feel like it doesn't have to be scary. I remember my business coach saying to me once, she said, but what about if it didn't have to be hard? because I was like, finding somebody, it's so hard. And she's like, but what about if it didn't have to be hard?
Yeah.
What about if you just approached it as, again, this is an experiment. We're going to try and do the best that we can to find the good fit. And we're just going to be transparent and honest and tell people what we need. You know, and I have people on my team, I would never ever tell my accountant that he's doing anything wrong, because I wouldn't even know the first thing to look at. Like, I love to do my personal budget. I don't want to do my business budget. Like, he does his job. I hired him. I had no interest whatsoever in getting to know. He's like, do you want QuickBooks training? I'm like, no, you are doing my stuff. I'm paying you, like, end of story. But then there are other people that I would hire for my team that I'm like, no, I need to know that process. And I think just figuring out what you feel like you need and be willing to experiment. Like, I've made hires and we've gotten, you know, a few weeks in, and I'm like, I actually did not need that role. I now realize, now that you're in it with me, that's not what I need at all. I need this. And then you have to have that hard conversation. Are you willing to do that or not? I'm reading the book, Clockwork. It's back here. And it's great because it talks a lot about helping to figure out those job descriptions and where you might need help. And there have been people who have hired me to do their social only to realize, oh, I need an employee because I need somebody to do all this other stuff that has nothing to do with social. So also establishing if you need them to be kind of a master of several tasks, or if you're comfortable with them being a master of one, because that's how I've built my team, is master of one. Everybody has one very specific job to do, and that's the only thing I ask them to do. And I do my absolute best to never ask them to do anything outside of that unless they volunteer it. And that helps us run more efficiently, because then they're not, you know, pulled in a million different directions.
That's powerful. And I mean, from the video space side of things, I can definitely attest to, you know, master of one. It's like, video editing is so difficult, and it's scary at first to kind of give up some of that control, because it's like, oh, no one can do this as good as I can. Well, why not? What if you taught them what if you taught them your skill set that helps you, like, do your job? And it's like, I've kind of implemented that in my own business, and now I have someone who has worked doing editing with me, and it's one of the greatest blessings I could have ever asked for, because it's like, you just freed up however much time you needed, you know, doing, you know, I mean, video editing for me, for any of the video folks out there, you know, video editing is like the biggest time suck. I mean, it's probably like 8 hours a day for a few days
tedious.
after a wedding. It's so tedious. So to have someone to help you with that, or whatever problem you're facing, whether it's social media, you know, the video editing, you know, marketing, you know, find that thing, the accounting. Like, I think the biggest and scariest thing is like approaching it, because it's so large and massive. It's like, oh God, it's scary, and like, you know, whatever. And then just actually like executing and just saying, you know what, like, this is what I need help in. Let's just try it. What's the worst that can happen? It doesn't go well, and we figure out we just check that off. No, that wasn't the solution. All right, let's go to another plan. So yeah, I've definitely, you know, felt that in my own business for sure.
Yeah, well, and I think there's been more trepidation with all of it with COVID, you know, because a lot of people know they're about to walk into probably the busiest year of their life. And you know, you need help, and you know, you need it now. So you want to make a decision, but you're so worried about making the wrong decision because you don't have time to correct the decision because you're going to be so busy. So, you know, those are all, it's so normal. We're all going through it. And I think that just hearing that it's normal is important. Yeah.
And it helps kind of say, okay, I can start to at least begin to take a step in the direction that I know that I probably need to go in. For me, it's social media for sure. Now in my personal experience, you know, do I need someone, you know, I mean, something, if software like Later, I mean, I still for the life of me can't figure out why I haven't gotten on that yet. Well, I'll tell you, the real thing about my social media was it got hacked, and I just, for whatever reason, haven't made the new account yet, because I can't use that account anymore. I had an ad account attached to it, and for whatever reason, I was just like, man, like, I don't know why I'm so hesitant to start this new account. I think you just need like you said, like the action steps to get there. And you know, what do I need help with? You know, okay, you know, just if Later doesn't work, you know, all right, we'll figure something else out for sure. So can't be afraid of failure at all. So
yeah, well, and you could even use if people, I know I got a comment today that, oh, well, we don't use that because it's a third-party app. And I'm like, well, it's an approved app, so there's nothing wrong with using it. It is actually Instagram approved. But, you can always use Facebook Creator Studio. It exists in Facebook for you to be able to post across platforms. It is their native platform. It is quote unquote the safest, option that's out there. It's, and it has some functions that other ones don't. Like they're all going to be useful in helping to battle the overwhelm, just to be able to know that you have the option to plan something, and if you're not using a tool, you can't effectively plan, because then you're using a Dropbox and a Google Doc, and you're like, pulling all of these other things to plan it. But even just something that allows you to put notes. I love Planoly because I could put my notes at the top to remind me what I'm supposed to be posting each day. So even if you're not a huge planner where you're getting that content in advance, just to remind yourself what you're supposed to be doing and housing all of it in one central location is really helpful for when you do have that spark of energy to be able to get in there and do it. You can say, I have enough energy and time to make 6 posts. So let me plan my 6 posts for the next 3 weeks and then move on,
Yes. I've found delegating in my business to be probably the biggest freedom for me from this feeling of like, oh my gosh, like I have to do everything. And you don't. I mean, the honest truth is I don't think you have to. You just have to find people that you trust and that I think see your vision and know what you need help with. I think we'd probably be better off, with our business, in terms of growing and just mental state, if we were to maybe delegate a few things for sure.
Yeah. And it is. I mean, I think it's not only just scary to trust somebody, but sometimes people get really caught up in the how do I afford to delegate, because I'm trying to afford to delegate, but I'm also trying to get more customers in to be able to do it. And there comes a tipping point where you can't not afford to do it. And you have to just be willing to take the financial risk to see the financial payoff. And I think that was one of the hard lessons for me, is the first time I wanted to hire, I'm like, well, how do I do that? So I messaged my accountant, because I was lucky enough to have one. And I said, how much is it going to cost me on an hourly basis if I want to pay this person this? It's not just, a $15 an hour position. It's, all the taxes and liabilities on top of that. And then I had to decide, is this a better, employee situation, or is this a better contractor situation? Just really feeling comfortable to sit down and do the math and know what your risk tolerance is. Like, I know I have a certain threshold that if I spend over that, I'm going to have an anxiety attack about it. And I'm going to think about it so much that it's not worth it for me. But if I can come in a little under and then grow it, 2 months from now to something a little bigger, it feels less scary. And I think that's the thing. If we can all just, again, do that heart and mind work and say, I know I could spend this much. It's likely not going to be as much as you need. It never is. But to at least accept that amount mentally, it makes it a lot easier to do that. If you've never hired before, if you've already had a team, then it's a little easier, because you at least already have your budget number. And then it's just finding the right person. And now there are all kinds of people who can help you recruit those people now. That's a whole position, like these external freelance HR people who can help source those employees for you outside of a job posting platform. And that's mind blowing to me now that exists in our world.
For sure. Yeah, it is. And I've had success using, I mean, it's not that, but I mean, services similar to that. And also, I mean, even like job board sites, like that kind of stuff, for freelancers is, I've definitely found some stuff on there for sure. What a time. I mean, honestly, the technology to be able to kind of, start your own business in the 21st century is pretty great. So,
yes.
Frank, anything else you want to add? I know we're getting close to an hour here, and I know Serena's got some other stuff going on. Maybe close us out if you got nothing else.
No, I mean, I just want to thank you, Serena, for coming on. I think there was a lot of amazing information that I can't, we always say this, it's like, as a host, you can't take the notes live. So I will make sure to go back and rewatch.
We go back and watch.
But I just really appreciate you taking the time. Like Nick said, we know that you have something else, and we also appreciate you, moving yourself a couple of weeks forward.
To
kind of help us out with a gap that we didn't expect to have. So we appreciate that as well. And sorry that David couldn't be here. But hopefully we were able to kind of fill in those big shoes.
Yeah, it's fine. I'll talk to David, I'm sure, on Instagram. I've known him. I don't know if he told you, but I've known him since 2004. So we've known each other for a long time. Yeah, he knew me back in my like catering sales manager days. So
wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure he's watching this somewhere, and hopefully got a smile on his face or something. But yeah, Serena, thank you so much for being on with us, and hopefully we'll have you back on in the future. And thanks for watching. I think that's going to wrap this one up. Go do something great this week, and we will see you next week, y'all. Peace.
Bye.